Welcome to Stop My Crisis with Vivian Gaspar, and I am your host, Vivian Gaspar. I'm here today with Sara Sencer McArdle, and she is a practicing lawyer for over 36 years, practicing in New Jersey since 1980, and 22 years as an Essex County Assistant Prosecutor, as well as 14 years in private practice in family law and criminal defense. Sara, welcome to the show.
Nice to see you, Vivian.
Thank you. And I would love to ask you about your practice today.
And I would love for you to ask me questions.
Well, my biggest concern that causes so much hardship for the general population, and of course I focus in my practice on mortgage modification, and a very large segment of my clientele are people whose hardships stem from getting divorced. What have you seen in general, because we have statistics everywhere, but in your opinion, what percentage of the American population truly does get divorced?
Well, most of the people who come into my office are getting divorced. But I would say that the statistics show 50%.
Oh, it really is that accurate?
Yes, that's what they say.
How does that change for second or third time marriages?
From what I'm reading, it's worse for second or third time marriages. It's more, people don't learn from their lessons, I guess.
Oh, human behavior. I guess they need to start taking some courses on how to make the second and third time work better. And of your experience, how many of your clientele have difficulty with one of the partners retaining the home, the family residence?
That's a very difficult issue, and it depends on which partner it is. Is it the supporting spouse or the supported spouse? Obviously, if somebody's the supporting spouse and they've been paying the mortgage all these years, as long as there's not a lot of equity in the home, they can afford to keep paying it. We run into problems, and several of my clients have lived in a home for 5, 10, 15 years, and then they're getting divorced, and they don't have the money to pay the mortgage. They don't have the money to refinance the mortgage. And unless they can substitute one form of retirement asset for the house or a bank account for the house, they're not able to keep the house. And if they do, they often lose the house later on down the road. I have several clients that's happened to.
Now, usually the supported spouse is the one who retains custody of the children, the custodial parents, and they're trying to keep that steady environment for the children?
That's slowly changing.
Oh.
That's slowly changing.
How do you see that change?
Well, more and more, it used to be the supported spouse was the wife and the supporting spouse was the husband. With women's lib and everybody going back to work, that's not always the case. Fathers, I think, are taking a much more active role in their children's lives than they used to before, and fathers are now wanting more time than the every other weekend one dinner during the week. That's a real change in the law, and the law says that both parents have an equal right to parent their children.
And I think that's a great way to see everything. They used to have what they call the Disney father syndrome, right?
Right.
The up to the 50s or 60s, and man, has that changed. I think a larger segment of the population for women are making more money than ever, and there's even stay-at-home dads. Now, how does that complicate marriages when they get divorced?
Well, when a stay-at-home dad gets divorced, it's the same as a stay-at-home mom. If he doesn't have an income, the wife or the supporting spouse will be paying him alimony. It's an equal law now, not the way it used to be.
Well, I've always heard so many times that the laws favor the women and men feel like they're getting a bad rap. Do you see that when you go to court?
I see that the law is changing. I see that, for example, there's a new law there's a new law that says that alimony, both parties have the right to the lifestyle that they once enjoyed. So it used to be that the men felt, oh, I get divorced and I have to live in a one-bedroom apartment and my wife lives in a house where she can keep the children. That is not the case anymore. The new law says both parties have the right to live an equal lifestyle.
Do you see people trying to get along more and do their divorce more amicably? Now, of course, as an attorney, once they hire you, they're not getting along well enough to do it without an attorney. But is it really that much of they're fighting each other tooth and nail, and they just want a facilitator? What do you see?
Sometimes I always try to get my clients to agree to go to mediation.
Oh,
because
is that more popular now, mediation?
Well, it's popular if the people can get along, but mediation is good because it keeps the costs of divorce down. If parties can work out a property settlement agreement and just bring it to us to go over, hey, sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not fair, and I've had that happen, but if they can get through mediation, sometimes it keeps the cost down.
Do you see that divorce in court is a very long, drawn-out process? I mean, how long is an average process from when they start it to when it's finally achieved? What do you see that average being?
The goal is a year.
A year. Is that normal, or is that's a goal you say?
That's the goal. Some are longer and some are less.
Really? There's less?
You can do it in less time. I've done them in maybe 2 or 3 months if the parties agree.
2 or 3 months? Mm-hmm. That is a really speedy divorce.
Yeah, well.
What's a long one? Tell us, what's a long divorce?
2 or 3 years.
Really?
It can happen, yes, it can happen.
Why does it drag out so long?
Because the courts are busy and they don't have time for trials. And when parties can't agree, the only thing one can do is have a trial. And the courts are busy, they don't have time. And the worst thing about it is that you might get 1 day for a trial, and 2 months later you might get another day. And another
that's
day.
Stretched out.
Right. So even that is stretched out because the courts have many other things to do besides trials. They have ESP settlements, which is...
Wait, before we get technical,
yes,
what's an ESP
An
settlement?
ESP is a panel who meets with litigants and their lawyers and tries to tell them how they think the divorce will end up. This comes down the road once the divorce has been filed. There are settlements for that. There's what we call ISCs, which are days that they make the litigants and the parties come to the courthouse, sit at a table, and try to
hash it out.
Really hash it out. So and there's many cases in the courthouse, and when there are trials, they back up. One judge recently in Morris County had a 9-month trial.
9 months?
9-month trial.
Did they have a lot of assets? Was it a
wealthy? It was custody.
Oh, it wasn't about money.
It was not about money. It was about custody.
So when the two people are fighting for, was it primary custody?
Right, primary custody. It's a terrible, terrible situation.
Do they have therapists come in and say what's best for the children?
Absolutely.
Or how do they handle that?
Well, if you have a custody issue, you are required, most judges will make you hire a custody evaluator. And the custody evaluator will meet with the children, meet with the parents, evaluate what the relationship is between the child and the individual parent, and then write a report and set forth what they believe the custody situation should be. Then the other party, if they don't like it, can go hire their own custody evaluator.
And then they're duking it out.
And then they're duking it out in court on custody. So,
well, let me ask you this. I actually heard that at a certain age, they take the children's opinion of who they want to live with a lot more seriously. What age is that?
12.
12? That seems kind of young.
They start to talk to children at the age of 12. Now, that being said, the courts don't want the children dragged into the divorce, and they don't want to interview the children. And it's really only in an extreme case where the children should be, interviewed and discuss these kinds of issues. Because imagine how difficult it is for a child to say, I want to choose this parent over that parent.
That must be so difficult.
It is very, very difficult. Heart-wrenching for the child, and fear that, what is the other parent going to think? Are they going to hate me for what I say? Will they ever love me again?
Oh my God.
How can I make that kind of choice? So it's really best to try to keep the kids out of court. Does it happen occasionally? Yes, but very occasionally.
Well, on that note, how is it any different when used to be that everyone assumed that the mother got full custody and the father did visitation. As we were just mentioning, it's changing, it's evolving. Do you see the shift in fathers getting more frequently primary custody instead of just assuming it's the mother?
I see more of a fight between it, and I see a lot of shared custody situations.
Do you see fathers getting more sole custody and then the mother getting visitation where it used to be flipped?
Very few people get sole custody. In New Jersey.
In New Jersey,
it's joint legal custody generally. And that means that one parent, joint legal custody means that both of them have the right to make the important decisions in the child's life.
But then how do they live so separately? I mean, what if the parents live in different towns and you don't want to change school systems?
Well, don't confuse legal custody with residential custody.
Could you explain that for us, what that means?
Yes.
What is that difference?
Residential custody means who the child is going to live with.
Right.
Legal custody means what parent has the right to make important decisions about the child's life.
Shouldn't they both be making those decisions?
Well, that's
ideally?
what joint legal custody is. A sole basically takes all the rights away from one parent. All decision making. So that's not a favored way for custody in New Jersey.
But how do they decide who gets the custodial, like where they lived?
Well, I mean, I think that depends on a whole lot of things. What do the parents do? How available are they for the children? Can they transport the children to daycare or work? Are they available at night to put the children to bed? What is their work? What is the working schedule? Somebody who works in New York and leaves at 6 in the morning and comes back at 10 o'clock at night is not going to be available for the children. So that's one really important aspect.
What if that person would fight for custody, though? And they don't care. They just getting very adversarial, and they say, I don't care that I commute to New York. I still want custody. What happens then?
Well, I think that's for the court to decide and the custody evaluator to look at it reasonably and look at how this is really going to work. Obviously, a child who's going to be with a daycare or nanny from 8 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night when there's another parent who's available is not a great situation for the child. And they look at the best interests of the child, and everything rotates around the best interest of the child.
What about if there's any kind of domestic abuse situation that's alleged? And the one person it's alleged against is saying, well, wait a second, that never happened. Do they have to have had police intervention to substantiate it in order for that alleged to be acted on by the court?
Oh, that's a whole different subject.
Did I just throw a monkey wrench in
there? That's a whole different subject.
I've gone to several meetings and charities and fundraisers where they have the battered women's shelters, and then you have, a man will say, wait a second, I've lived through it. How come it's only battered women? And then
But it's not.
And then they say the women's shelters will say, wait a second, we allow for men. And so now the stereotypes are getting shattered. What have you seen?
I've seen it on both sides. I have clients who are men who have filed temporary restraining orders. I have clients who are women who have filed temporary restraining orders. That also mixes up the custody issue. Because generally the courts, when somebody comes in on temporary restraining order, will remove the children from the person who's accused of committing the domestic violence.
But what if it's a false allegation? What recourse do they have? I mean, God forbid the children end up in getting removed from someone where it's not even true. There's so many different moving parts. Have you seen this happen in your clients?
All the time. You do not need a lot of proof to charge somebody with a temporary restraining order. However, it's not forever because within 30 days, usually it's much shorter, there's a trial to determine whether an act of domestic violence occurred. And even if they find that, yes, an act of domestic violence occurred, the other party, the party who's accused, still gets to see the children and spend time with the children as long as they're not a danger to the children.
Well, is it supervised visitation?
Not necessarily at all. No, not necessarily at all. It depends on the act. It depends on whether there are drugs or alcohol involved. It depends the nature of the act. How violent was it? Was it just harassment? I don't mean to say just harassment. Was it harassment? Or did somebody get badly injured. DCPP, they are called on every domestic violence case if there are children involved, on every single one. So not only are the courts involved, but there's another agency involved. They do their investigation. They make findings. They check on, have the children been affected by what's happening. So yes, when domestic violence is alleged, it's a difficult process for everyone.
Wow. So
for both sides, by the way.
Well, we do have to start wrapping up. So my question to you is, if someone is in fear of their life or their safety or even their children, and they are afraid to reach out for divorce, let's just end on that note. What advice would you have for my audience, and what should they do? If
they're afraid, nobody has the right to beat up on or abuse anybody else. Therefore, if they're afraid, and they should call the police. They should go, and talk to people who are knowledgeable about what to do about domestic violence and how to protect themselves.
Do you have to currently be in that circumstance to get assistance, or could it have happened previously and they're still suffering an after effect?
Absolutely.
Is there a range of times when you can get that help?
No, I think you can go anytime you want. Because look, if you've suffered from it in the past and you're still in the same situation, the chances are, if there hasn't been therapy or an understanding on the part of the abuser, it's going to happen again.
I went to a seminar not too long ago where I actually heard that not only is it across all socioeconomical levels, any type of spousal abuse, child abuse, but unfortunately sometimes it's even more prevalent in better neighborhoods, because maybe they're having financial issues and they feel it more and they take it out, their anger, on the people closest to them. So sometimes it happens to more affluent areas, and the women are afraid because the control of the money is not always, but usually with the husband. Of course, nowadays it's flipped a little bit, but it could be vice versa. But can you help someone where you give them that advice, and what do they do next? What's a step?
The step is, if they're really being harmed, to pick up the phone, call the police, let the police get involved, or go to court on your own or with a lawyer.
You can go to court on your own if you don't have the money for an attorney?
You can go to court on your own, ask for the domestic violence unit, and explain what's going on, and they will take a report and go before a judge and explain what's happened. And more likely than not, the judges err on the side of caution. A TRO will emanate from that.
TRO is the temporary
restraining order, right.
And for those who aren't in that situation, they just feel like they really can't be in this marriage for whatever reason and they can't resolve it. What's a good first step if you're looking to prepare for any divorce?
A good first step is to go see a lawyer. And I know my office, we give an hour free consult.
Oh, free consultation.
Right, there you go. Come in and talk to somebody. It's confidential, and find out what the procedure is, what has to be done, and what the difficulties are with regard to filing for a divorce. What are the issues? What issues will you encounter?
Do you come back to help people who have already been divorced, and let's say, for example, they want to change custodial arrangements, or they're not getting the amount of child support for whatever reason, even though it's a enforcement action, or let's say someone who's the one who's supposed to pay child support has seen a decline in income and they want to change that. Do they need an attorney for that?
They do, because just because someone loses income doesn't mean they're going to get an automatic reduction. There are many, many post-judgment issues after a divorce. Everyone should remember that that property settlement agreement is written in gold. Everybody follows it, the courts follow it, but there are issues that come up after a divorce, and often there's litigation afterward.
Is there a limit on how long after a divorce is finalized that there could be amendments to either a financial arrangement like spousal support, child support, or even change of custody? Let's say someone got married 10 years ago. Divorced 10 years ago. If someone got divorced 10 years ago and they now want to change arrangements, or even where they live with the children, let's say they want to get remarried and they have to move out of state, is there a limitation on how they need to utilize a family law attorney such as yourself, and what stage you're in after the divorce is finalized?
once a divorce is finalized, you can come in the next week. It's
next week or 10 years later.
Yeah,
anytime.
Anytime you can come into court and file for a change if there's a change of circumstances. Moving out of state is a whole difficult issue for everybody involved, and those are heart-wrenching cases for the courts, because obviously the custodial parent wants to be happy, but the non-custodial parent doesn't want to lose his ability to see his children or her children on a regular basis. Very difficult cases.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all this expertise. Hopefully that helps anyone who's in a very stressful situation in their marriage for whatever reason. And of course, besides married, I'm sure you do couples who live together, maybe cohabitating.
Yes.
And you handle those circumstances.
Handle all family law.
Well, thank you very much, Sara, for sharing your expertise.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hazardous chemicals. Could you be exposed at work? Employers are required by law to train you on the hazards of chemicals you work with, how they could harm you, and how exposure can be prevented. For information, go to njwec.org or osha.gov. This message brought to you by the New Jersey Work Environment Council.
Welcome back to Stop My Crisis with Vivian Gaspar. I'm your host, Vivian Gaspar, and here with me today is Lynne Pastor. Welcome, Lynne. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And Lynne is a licensed social worker who assists couples who are divorcing to manage emotional changes, which are an integral part of the divorce and post-divorce process. She also teaches adults who are divorcing on how to co-parent in a healthy manner for their child or children. I really would love to pick your brain for a few minutes because unfortunately the divorce rate for first-time marriages, and of course when the children are younger, tends to be in the first-time marriages, unfortunately at 50%. And that's what we understand it to be. And most of those people do have children. And of course, not to mention the turmoil they go through themselves emotionally. So what I want to ask you is, what is the most common point that you find that people divorce when there's children involved in the children's lives? At what point in the children's life do they divorce most frequently?
In terms of age?
Yeah, the children's age, correct.
I would say probably there are about 3 points.
Oh.
One is when the children are between about 8 and 10 years old. Second is when they are getting ready to graduate high school. And sometimes parents have thought about this in advance and they feel, well, they can hang in until their son or daughter graduates high school. And the third time is when their children are actually in college, because as their sons and daughters go further in college, they tend to come home less frequently. And so a parent may feel, well, my daughter or my son is an adult now. They don't need me as much as they did when they were little, so this would be a good time to divorce.
How many of those are trying to reconnect and stay together for their children versus just learn to be happily well-adjusted divorced individuals?
Sometimes they initially try to stay together for the sake of the children, and that goes in 2 directions. Either they do stay together, generally in very unhappy marriages, or they reconsider their initial decision and they do decide to divorce.
Because people naturally would like to avoid divorce, do you think there's 3 tips or a few tips you could provide our audience on if they are going to be getting divorced, what they could do better before their second marriage? Because hopefully people, find love again. And what's the best thing to do when they find a new love, as to not have their second marriage turn into their second divorce? What would you suggest?
Well, the first thing is that if they have already made the decision to divorce, they really should both be involved in divorce counseling. It's very important for people to understand why the marriage is not healthy and why they're getting divorced. And if they don't invest the time and energy to understand this, they're almost guaranteed to repeat it in a new relationship. Secondly, divorce is a process and there's fallout, and people, in fairness to themselves and anyone else who they may meet, should give themselves time to get to know themselves, to heal, and to feel comfortable with themselves when they're not in a relationship.
Discover themselves again.
That's right.
The feeling of independence before they rejoin with codependence.
Being
healthy codependence.
Healthy. And being an individual is way different than being part of a couple. And the third point is that before people engage in a new relationship, they really should engage in premarital counseling. There are many new challenges with a blended family. The most important thing is that the parents of all the children involved are getting help not only for themselves, the adults, but also for the children. Because children are resilient, but they also need help in understanding what's going on in terms of their biological parents, as well as perhaps new potential step-parents and new potential siblings.
So how long does someone expect to stay in therapy? I mean, people sometimes have said they're afraid of therapy because they're afraid they're now stuck in it for life. So,
well, the therapist does not make the decision about how long a person should be in therapy. Individuals make this decision. They have the choice. And they work with their therapist to create a treatment plan and to set goals, which are periodically reviewed in therapy. Some people may be in therapy for a few months. Some people may engage in therapy for a few years. It varies.
Well, I really think that especially with all the complications of the different types of stress that arise from all the aspects we have facing us now, the challenges we have in life, especially with children sometimes being of varying ages and, you know, financial situations. If people don't learn coping mechanisms that they could learn in therapy, then they're just bound to repeat the same tragic mistakes.
Unfortunately, you are correct. And hopefully what people realize is that therapy is safe. No one is going to be making decisions for anybody else. Individuals make their own decisions.
It's good to know.
They get some guidance from the therapist. But therapy is a safe place, and what people say in the room of their therapist stays in that room.
I think so many times people are skewed by what therapy is based on what they see in movies and television. And they always say, so what do you think about that? And I'm like, we're not getting any straight answers. So tell us, is that an urban legend? Do therapists actually help you with a straight answer by guiding you and not just saying, so what do you think?
Well, of course, a therapist would be very interested in what a person thinks. But yes, there is guidance involved. But again, the therapist is not providing the answers. People come with their answers. They often need help to clarify those.
And so I understand you also help people with substance abuse issues as another portion of your practice.
Yes.
Do you ever see that lens from one to the other, that perhaps someone got divorced because of substance abuse issue, or perhaps it's involving their children? And do you suggest other resources they should seek when that's an issue in their family?
Sometimes the substance use issue for either the person who's using or the codependent in the relationship very much, of course, impacts the marriage. And it's hard to separate. But there are many resources available for people with abuse and dependence problems, and those could be anywhere from detoxification if someone needs it, to medication, to therapy on an outpatient basis. And that can occur in conjunction with marital therapy.
If someone just got divorced, and how they can prevent that from happening to their family again?
The most important thing I would say is find a good therapist and focus on the problems that existed in the marriage so that you have a true understanding of why the marriage did not work. You're much less likely to repeat it in future relationships.
Great. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Lynne. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you.